What happens when a first-class bully, dripping in diamonds, decides the modest-looking black woman beside her doesn't belong? She points a manicured finger at a simple leather bag and makes an accusation that echoes through the entire VIP lounge. But she made a fatal mistake. She didn't just pick on a random passenger, she picked on Dr. Ella Hayes. And that bag, it wasn't just a bag. It was a personal gift from the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, and the karma that was about to unfold was more brutal than any airport security check. The Global Alliance First-Class Lounge at JFK International Airport was a cathedral of quiet. The silence was a commodity, purchased for thousands of dollars a ticket. It was a curated hush, broken only by the respectful clink of heavy glassware, the soft swoosh of a cashmere coat being removed, and the whisper of servers offering complimentary champagne or artisan flatbreads. The air itself smelled expensive, a faint, antiseptic blend of leather cleaner, brewed coffee, and the dominant, sharp notes of success, a perfume that seemed to be a favorite among the female clientele. Dr. Ella Hayes sat in a wingback chair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the planes crawl across the tarmac. She fit, and yet she didn't. She wore a simple, tailored linen suit in a practical navy color, her hair pulled back in a neat twist. There was no flashy jewelry, only a simple gold band on one finger and a functional, unadorned watch. She was an island of understated purpose in an ocean of performative leisure. On the floor beside her chair sat a cobalt blue leather satchel. It was not a Birkin. It was not a Gucci. It bore no logo, no gold-plated seals or LVs. Its only ornament was a small, silver compass rose embedded in the main clasp. It was a beautiful object, but its beauty was in its craftsmanship, the perfect, tiny stitches, the suppleness of the grain, the sheer, unapologetic blueness of the leather. To anyone who understood quality, it was magnificent. To anyone who understood only brands, it was invisible. Ella was exhausted. She was flying from New York to Geneva, a routine flight that felt anything but. She had just returned, 48 hours prior, from a grueling 3-month field assignment in the Sahel region of Africa. Her work was not the clean, press conference and handshake kind of diplomacy. It was the dusty, dangerous, and desperate kind. She negotiated with warlords over water rights, brokered ceasefires between village elders, and navigated minefields, both literal and bureaucratic, to get food aid to starving populations. Geneva, with its endless meetings and formalized, stale arguments, was her decompression, and she dreaded it. She was reading a dense, 100-page bound report stamped Confidential, UN Development Program. The hush of the lounge was suddenly sliced apart by a voice. "Stephen, I am telling you, this is not Veuve Clicquot. It's Prosecco. They're serving Prosecco in the first-class lounge. It's an outrage." Caroline Miller arrived like a weather system. She was a tornado of logos, a whirlwind of blonde highlights, and an electrical storm of complaints. She wore a white Chanel tracksuit, blindingly new white sneakers with a prominent red check, and a diamond ring that looked heavy enough to be a weapon. She was trailed by her husband, Stephen Miller, a man who seemed to be perpetually braced for impact. He was pale, fidgety, and clutched his phone as if it were a life raft. "Cara, it's fine. It's just champagne," he muttered, his eyes darting around, terrified of making a scene. "It is not fine, Stephen. It's the principle," Caroline snapped. She scanned the lounge, her eyes predatory, looking for a place to sit, and a new thing to find fault with. Her gaze swept past Ella, flickered back, and then settled. It was a look Ella knew well. It was the assessment. The how did you get in here? Look. Caroline's lip curled. She saw the simple suit, the lack of makeup, the unbranded bag. She saw, most of all, a black woman sitting alone. In her lounge. Caroline marched over. Ella, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, looked up from her report. "Excuse me," Caroline said, not as a question, but as a command. Ella blinked. "Yes?" "I need this area. My husband and I would like to sit by the window." Ella looked around. The lounge was, at best, half full. There were dozens of empty seats by the window. "I'm sorry," Ella said, her voice polite but firm. "I believe this seat is taken." "By me." Caroline let out a short, incredulous laugh. "This whole area. You're taking up 4 seats with all your clutter." She pointed a manicured finger at the cobalt blue bag. "You can't just leave your things on the floor like that. It's a tripping hazard, and frankly, it's unhygienic." Stephen Miller looked mortified. "Cara, please, let's just sit over there." "No, Stephen, I like this view." She turned back to Ella. The smile she gave was all teeth. "You're clearly finished. Why don't you pack up your book and go?" Ella felt a familiar, weary sigh build in her chest. She had stared down men with machine guns who had shown her more respect. "I'm not finished," she said simply. "I'm waiting for my flight." "We're all waiting for a flight, honey," Caroline said, her voice dripping with condescension. "That's what one does at an airport. But some of us," she gestured to herself, "are priority members, and we don't appreciate the service standards slipping." "Service standards?" Ella asked, finally closing her report. "Yes, the clientele." Caroline's eyes deliberately raked over Ella, from her simple flats to her unstyled hair. "This is supposed to be an exclusive space, for people who have earned it. Not for just anyone." The implication was as loud as a gunshot in the quiet room. Ella was just anyone. She was the slipping standard. Ella gathered her things, not to leave, but to consolidate. She placed her report neatly into the blue satchel. Caroline watched her, her eyes narrowing, and that's when she truly saw the bag. As Ella zipped the bag shut, Caroline's eyes fixed on the cobalt leather. Her expression shifted from general disdain to a specific, focused contempt. It was the look of a connoisseur, or someone who desperately believed she was one, who had just spotted a forgery. "Oh my God," Caroline whispered, loud enough for 3 rows of seats to hear. "Stephen, look at this. You have got to be kidding me." Stephen, who had been trying to shrink into the plush carpet, flinched. "Cara, what now?" "This," Caroline pointed at the bag. "This is what I'm talking about. The audacity." Ella stood up, her 5'9" frame casting a shadow over the seated woman. "Is there a problem with my luggage?" "A problem?" Caroline laughed, a high, piercing sound. "Honey, problem doesn't even begin to cover it. That is the worst knockoff I have ever seen. Are you even trying?" Ella froze. Of all the things she had been accused of in her life, a spy, a government stooge, a meddling foreigner, this was a new one. I beg your pardon?" "Your bag," Caroline said, as if speaking to a simple child. "That pathetic fake. What is it supposed to be? A Hermes? A Birkin? Honey, the stitching is all wrong. The leather looks like plastic, and the clasp. My God, that tacky little compass. Who do you think you're fooling?" Ella looked down at her bag, the small shield that had been given to her in an office overlooking the East River. "This isn't a Hermes," she said quietly. "It's not trying to be." "Oh, please," Caroline scoffed, now fully playing to the room. A few other passengers were beginning to stare. "That's what they all say when they're caught. It's not a fake, it's a tribute." "It's insulting. It's insulting to people like me who spend tens of thousands of dollars, real money, on real luxury. It's women like you who dilute the brand." "This bag has no brand," Ella stated, her voice dropping to a low, cold monotone. She was no longer tired. She was angry. "Right. A bespoke gift, I suppose," Caroline mocked, using air quotes. "From who, your boyfriend? The one who supposedly got you into this lounge? Let me guess. He works in finance?" The racist classist assumptions piled up, one on top of the other, forming a suffocating, ugly heap. Ella felt the blood rush to her face. She was a 52-year-old woman with a doctorate in international relations, 2 honorary degrees, and a diplomatic passport. She had advised presidents. She had saved lives. And here, in this temple of overpriced comfort, she was being reduced to a grifter with a fake bag and a boyfriend in finance. "This is harassment," Ella said, her voice dangerously calm. "I am a passenger, just like you, and you are creating a disturbance. I'm going to have to ask you to leave me alone." "Harassment?" Caroline shrieked, delighted. This was the fight she had been looking for. "I'm being harassed. I'm being exposed to fraud. Counterfeit goods are illegal, you know. I have half a mind to call security. In fact," Caroline looked around wildly, "where is the manager? David, get over here. This is unacceptable." She was making good on her threat. A man in a sharp black suit, his face a mask of professional anxiety, was already gliding towards them. This was David, the lounge manager. He looked like a man approaching a bomb he was paid far too little to defuse. "Mrs. Miller," David said, his voice a strained whisper. "Is everything all right? Can I get you another beverage?" "No, you can't, David. What you can do is explain to me why this woman is being allowed to flaunt her illegal, counterfeit goods in my face. It's a disgrace to the airline. I want her removed." David, the lounge manager, felt a migraine blooming behind his left eye. He knew Caroline Miller. Everyone who worked the premium shift at JFK knew her. She was a Diamond Tier Priority 1 passenger, which in airline speak meant nightmare customer we must appease at all costs. Her husband's corporate account spent millions a year. But removed. He turned his strained but polite gaze to Ella. He saw a woman who looked, in a word, professional. She was poised. Her expression was one of controlled fury, and she stood with an authority that had nothing to do with logos or bank accounts. David was in a classic, no-win situation. "Mrs. Miller, I'm not sure I understand the problem," David said, trying to de-escalate. "The problem, David," Caroline said, drawing the word out, "is this." She pointed again at the cobalt blue bag, which Ella now held firmly in her hand. "It's a fake, a cheap, disgusting knockoff. It's a violation of this lounge's code of conduct, I'm sure. We are supposed to be protected from this kind of fraudulence." David looked at the bag. It was a blue bag. He looked at Ella. "Ma'am, I do apologize for this disturbance. Mrs. Miller is one of our most valued guests." "And I am not," Ella replied, her voice cutting through his platitudes. "I am a passenger. I am flying business class on your airline. And this valued guest has publicly accused me of carrying counterfeit goods, insulted my appearance, and implied I don't belong here. She is the one causing the disturbance, not me, and I want to file a formal complaint against her." This was not how it was supposed to go. David's script had just been flipped. The problem was supposed to shrink, apologize, and scurry away. The problem was not supposed to file a counter-complaint. Caroline Miller looked as if she'd been slapped. "A complaint? Against me? Do you have any idea who I am, who my husband is?" Stephen Miller, who had been trying to become one with the armchair, finally spoke. "Caroline, for God's sake, stop it. Just stop. We're going to be late." He was sweating, his face a sickly shade of grey. "Don't you dare tell me to stop, Stephen. This woman is insulting me." "I have not said a single word to you, madam," Ella said, "until you accosted me. My bag is not counterfeit. It is not fake. It is not a Hermes. It's a bespoke gift, and it is none of your business." "Bespoke!" Caroline spat the word. "That's a $5 word for made in a sweatshop. David, I am not moving until she is. Call security. Verify her ticket. Check her baggage. I want her out." David was trapped. He couldn't accuse a passenger of having a fake bag, but he also couldn't ignore a direct demand from Caroline Miller. "Ma'am," he said to Ella, his voice full of apology. I can't ask you to leave. But perhaps, for the comfort of all guests, you would be willing to just show me the bag. A brand tag, perhaps?" Ella stared at him. "You are siding with her." "I'm not siding." "You are. You are asking me to prove my bag is real, because she, a loud, white, and wealthy woman, has decided it's fake. Is that the airline's official policy?" David flinched. The words white and wealthy hit a nerve. This was an HR nightmare. "No, of course not, Doctor." He glanced at the passenger manifest on his tablet. "Dr. Hayes, Doctor?" Caroline pounced. "Doctor? A doctor of what? Weaving?" "A doctor of international relations," Ella said, her patience finally snapping. "And I am a senior attaché for the United Nations. I am flying to Geneva for the Global Development Summit. And this bag," she held it up, "is a personal gift from the Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres. Now, if you'll excuse me, David," she put a sharp emphasis on his name, "you can either handle your valued guest, or I will be filing my complaint not just against her, but against you and this airline for enabling public harassment and racial profiling." The lounge went so quiet you could hear the ice melting in a glass across the room. David was pale. "Dr. Hayes, I see." Caroline, however, was undeterred. She burst out laughing. "The UN? The Secretary-General? That's the best you could come up with? That is priceless. You're not a diplomat, you're a comedian. David, she's clearly delusional. Call security. She's a liar." "Ma'am, that's enough," David said, his voice finally finding a spine. "Dr. Hayes is a verified passenger with all the correct credentials. Mrs. Miller, you are the one causing the disturbance. I must ask you to lower your voice, or you will be the one I escort from the lounge." Caroline's jaw dropped. Her? Be escorted out? Before she could unleash the volcanic eruption of fury that was building, the PA system chimed. "Now boarding. Global Alliance Flight 108 to Geneva. Business class, rows 1 through 5. Ella zipped her bag, her hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. "That's my flight," she said to David. "Thank you for, eventually, doing your job." She turned and walked, head held high, towards the boarding gate. Caroline Miller stared after her, her face a mask of purple simmering rage. "This," she seethed to her husband, "is not over. Get our things, Stephen. We're on that flight, and I will have the last word." Ella walked down the long, carpeted jet bridge, the scent of jet fuel and recycled air replacing the lounge's perfumed stillness. She was rattled, more than she cared to admit. The confrontation had scraped away the thin layer of civilian composure she had built up, leaving her field assignment nerves raw. She found her seat, 4A, a window seat in the business class cabin. It was a private pod, her sanctuary for the next 7 hours. She slipped the cobalt blue satchel off her shoulder, placing it carefully by her feet. Her hand rested on the leather, and she could almost feel the strength it was meant to impart. As the other passengers boarded, her mind drifted away from the ugliness in the lounge and back to the day she received the bag. It was a memory that served as her true north, a reminder of why she endured the flights, the danger, and the bureaucracy. The flashback began. It wasn't in a grand hall, but in the private 38th floor office of the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres. It was a clear, cold day in New York. She had just returned from a mission in Mali that had gone terribly wrong, and then, miraculously, right. A militia leader, a young man named Joseph, had seized control of a critical dam, cutting off water to 2 million people. The peacekeepers were preparing for a bloody assault. Ella, against all protocols, had taken a single, unarmed jeep into Joseph's compound. She hadn't come to threaten him. She had come to listen. She sat with him for 3 days. She learned he wasn't a monster. He was a terrified former engineering student whose village had been wiped out by a rival faction funded by the very government the UN was propping up. The dam was the only leverage he had left. Ella didn't offer him amnesty. She offered him a different future. She used her contacts at the World Bank, not to sanction him, but to propose a new regional hydroengineering project headed by him. She had, in effect, offered him a job that was more powerful than his gun. He had accepted. The water flowed. No shots were fired. Her bosses in the Security Council were furious at the breach of protocol. The Secretary-General, however, had summoned her to his private office. "Ella," Antonio Guterres said, his accent a warm Portuguese melody. He was a man with the weight of the world on his kind face. The Bamako report. It was unorthodox. "It was necessary, sir," Ella replied. "Yes," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "That is what they all say. But you are one of the few who is ever right." He sighed, walking to his window. "This job, we are surrounded by flags and motorcades and shields. But the real work, your work, is done without a shield. You operate in the open, with nothing but your words and your nerve. It is a terrifying way to live." He turned back to his desk and picked up a simple, elegant box. "I cannot give you a medal for this, Ella. The men you circumvented would never allow it. But I can give you this." He opened the box. Inside, resting on simple white linen, was the cobalt blue bag. "This came to me from a women's cooperative in Lisbon. My home," he explained, lifting it out. "They were refugees from Angola years ago. They rebuild their lives through this craft. They use reclaimed, high-grade leather, and they asked me to give this to someone who rebuilds. The blue. It is for our flag, the UN flag, but it is also the color of the sea. It is strong, resilient." He held it out to her. It was heavier than it looked. "It is meant to endure, Ella. Like you." He touched the small silver compass on the clasp. "They added this. They said it is for when you are lost in the bureaucracy or in the field, to remember what is true north, your purpose." Ella had taken the bag, her eyes stinging. It was not a status symbol. It was, as she had called it in the lounge, a shield, a symbol of service. The memory faded as a loud, familiar voice jolted her back to the present. "Right here, Stephen. 4D and 4F. Perfect." Ella looked up. Caroline Miller was standing in the aisle, directly across from her pod. She was staring at Ella, a toxic, triumphant smirk on her face. Her husband, Stephen, slumped into the seat beside her. 4F immediately opened his laptop and put on noise-cancelling headphones, his face a mask of pure misery. Caroline, however, didn't sit. She leaned over, bracing herself on the partition between their seats. "Doctor," she sneered, the word an insult. "Fancy seeing you here. I guess your diplomatic status doesn't even get you into first class. Just business. How developing nation of you." Ella met her gaze. "Have a pleasant flight, Mrs. Miller." "Oh, I will," Caroline whispered as the flight attendant, Sarah, walked by. "I always do, but I'm watching you, and your little shield." The plane took off, a smooth, powerful ascent that pressed Ella back into her seat. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, she tried to reclaim her focus. She opened the blue satchel and pulled out the confidential report, her pen poised to make annotations. Geneva was in 2 days. She needed to be ready. Across the aisle, Caroline Miller was not a quiet neighbor. She had, in short order, complained that her pre-departure champagne was tepid, that her cashmere blanket had a synthetic smell, and that the noise-cancelling headphones provided were inferior to her own, which she had accidentally packed. Her husband, Stephen, just typed furiously on his laptop, his face pale, ignoring her. Caroline, starved for attention, turned her focus back to Ella. She saw the sheaf of papers, the official UN Development Program watermark visible on the cover. She let out another of her performative laughs. "Oh, this is too rich. Stephen, look, she's still playing pretend. She's got her little fake UN homework." Stephen just shook his head, not looking up. "Cara, I am begging you. I have to finish this proposal. My entire career is on the line. Just watch a movie, please." "This is my movie," Caroline hissed. "This is hilarious. Look at her, so serious. What are you developing, honey? A new recipe for brownies?" Ella refused to look up. She underlined a sentence in her report. "Do not engage. Do not escalate. You are a diplomat. She is just a noise." But Caroline was like a child poking a bear. She wanted a reaction. When Ella refused to give it to her, she escalated. She pressed the flight attendant call button hard. A moment later, Sarah, the same flight attendant who had greeted them, arrived. "Yes, Mrs. Miller. Can I get you something?" "Yes, Sarah," Caroline said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial concern. "I need to make a formal complaint, and I want to be moved." Sarah sighed internally. "I'm very sorry, Mom, but the business class cabin is completely full. I have nowhere to move you." "Then move her," Caroline said, gesturing to Ella. "I can't do that, Mum." "Listen to me," Caroline said, leaning in. "I am not comfortable. That woman," she pointed directly at Ella, "is suspicious. She was acting erratically in the lounge, claiming she was a UN diplomat." Ella put her report down. "Flight attendant, that is untrue." Caroline ignored her. "And now she's got these documents. They say confidential on them. She's just staring at them. How do we know she's not, a spy or a terrorist? She's flying to Geneva. It's all very suspicious. Well, look at her. She's black. It's... I don't feel safe." The entire cabin, which had been humming with the sound of movies and quiet conversation, went dead silent. This was no longer a spat about a handbag. This was a direct, dangerous, and racially charged accusation. Sarah, the flight attendant, was horrified. Her face went white. "Ma'am, you cannot say that. You absolutely cannot." "I can say it. I'm a concerned citizen. I have a right to feel safe on this plane." Caroline was high on her own drama, her eyes bright and feverish. Ella unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up, her small pod space feeling like a courtroom dock. "Flight attendant," Ella said, her voice shaking with a cold, precise anger. "My name is Dr. Ella Hayes. I am a senior attaché for the United Nations, and I am traveling on a UN laissez-passer, which is an official diplomatic passport. This report is for my mission. The accusation this passenger has just made is not only slanderous and vile, it is dangerous. Accusing a passenger of being a terrorist on a flight is a federal crime. I am the one who does not feel safe. Caroline saw her opening. A diplomatic passport. You? Oh, this is rich. Prove it. Show us. Let's all see this big, important diplomat passport. It was the ultimate degradation. Show me your papers. Sarah, the flight attendant, was now completely out of her depth. This was a security issue. Ma'am, Dr. Hayes, please both of you sit down. I have to get the purser. Please just sit down. Sarah rushed towards the galley, leaving Ella and Caroline staring at each other in a cabin thick with tension. Stephen Miller had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking, and it was then that a new voice spoke, cutting through the silence. That will not be necessary, Sarah. The voice came from seat 3B. It was a bulkhead seat, just ahead of Ella's row. The man sitting there had, until this moment, been the perfect passenger. He had boarded early, taken off his impeccably tailored cashmere blazer, and seemingly gone to sleep under an eye mask before the plane even pushed back. Now, the eye mask was off. He was a man in his late 60s, with sharp blue eyes, silver hair, and an aura of quiet, unassailable authority. He wasn't dressed like Caroline, in flashy brands. He was dressed like Ella, in quiet, expensive quality. He turned in his seat to look at the commotion behind him. His gaze passed over Sarah, the flight attendant, and landed first on a visibly shaking Ella. He gave her a small, respectful nod. Then his eyes moved to Caroline Miller. They were no longer kind. They were as cold and hard as chips of ice. "Mrs. Miller, is it?" he asked, his voice a calm baritone rumble. Caroline, momentarily thrown off by a new combatant, puffed herself up. "Yes." "And who are you?" "My name is James Harrison," the man said simply. The name dropped into the cabin like a stone. Nothing. It meant nothing to Caroline. "Well, James Harrison," she sneered, "this doesn't concern you. This is a security matter." "On the contrary," James said, "it concerns me a great deal. First, because I am trying to sleep, and second, because I happen to know Dr. Ella Hayes, and I can personally vouch for her, her credentials and her character." Ella stared at him. She didn't know this man. She had never seen him before in her life. Caroline was equally stunned. You know her?" "I know of her," James Harrison corrected, his gaze still locked on Caroline. Dr. Hayes's reputation in the world of international development precedes her. Her work in the Sahel alone is foundational. He then looked past Caroline to the pale, trembling man at her side. "You, I believe, are Stephen Miller, of the Miller Initiative for Urban Housing." Stephen Miller's head snapped up. His face, if possible, went even whiter. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. He stammered, Mr. Harrison." "Sir?" "James Harrison." "Of the Harrison Foundation?" "The same," James said. Caroline looked back and forth between them, her mind racing, a dreadful, dawning horror appearing on her face. "Stephen, what is he?" "What? He's the James Harrison, Cara," Stephen hissed, his voice cracking. "The Harrison Foundation, the grant, the $50 million grant we've been... Oh my God." The Harrison Foundation for Global Development was the single largest philanthropic organization on the planet. They funded billions in projects. They were, in Ella's world, the ultimate power. And Stephen Miller's small non-profit had been, for the last 6 months, desperately, slavishly petitioning them for a $50 million grant, a make-or-break grant that would launch his career into the stratosphere. James Harrison, the man in 3B, was the founder and CEO. He was the man Stephen was supposed to meet in Geneva. He was the man Stephen's entire life depended on, and he had just heard everything. "Mr. Harrison, sir," Stephen stammered, trying to unbuckle his seatbelt, to stand, to bow. I had no idea you were on this flight. This is all just a terrible misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding, Mr. Miller?" James Harrison asked, his voice dangerously soft. "It seems quite clear to me. Your wife, here, has been abusing a fellow passenger for the last 20 minutes, both in the lounge and on this aircraft." "No, she didn't. I didn't," Caroline began, her voice suddenly small, terrified. "You accused Dr. Hayes of carrying a fake bag," James continued, ticking the points off on his fingers. "You called her a grifter. You demanded she be removed from the lounge. And just now, you escalated to accusing her of being a spy and a terrorist, based on what exactly? The color of her skin? The fact she was reading a report?" The purser, Mark, had now arrived, drawn by the silence, not the shouting. He saw James Harrison, and his professional smile froze. He too knew who he was. "Mr. Harrison, is there a problem, sir?" James Harrison looked at him. "Yes, Mark, there is. But I am handling it." The cabin was a vacuum. The only sound was the steady drone of the engines. Everyone, passengers, flight attendants, even the purser, was watching the slow-motion car crash of Caroline Miller's life. "Mr. Harrison," Stephen Miller pleaded, his hands visibly shaking. He was half standing, half crouching in his aisle. "Please. My wife. She's just had a long day. She's high-strung. She didn't mean any of it. It's just talk. It's not our organization. Our organization is about helping people, about diversity." James Harrison's gaze was unrelenting. He didn't even look at Stephen. He looked at Caroline. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "the Harrison Foundation, as you may now know, is in the business of funding development. We are partners with the United Nations on dozens of projects. Dr. Hayes, in fact, is the lead analyst on a water security program we are co-funding in East Africa. I have read her reports. They are brilliant. They save lives. The homework you were mocking. That homework is probably a proposal that will keep 100,000 people from dying of thirst next year." Ella, stunned, just watched. Caroline was white-hot with panic. But, she didn't say anything. She just sat there. And that bag, Her bag? James said. "You mean the one you called fake and tacky? The one she told you was a gift from the Secretary General?" "She was lying," Caroline shrieked, her last defense. "I was not." Ella's voice was quiet, but it cut through, and Mr. Guterres gave it to me. "And I know for a fact that she is telling the truth," James Harrison said, "because I was at the luncheon where he spoke about the women's co-op in Lisbon that makes them. I, in fact, own a briefcase made by the same artisans." He reached down and pulled up a beautiful, simple, logo-free black leather briefcase. It was a perfect companion to Ella's bag. The twist of the knife was complete. Caroline's entire argument, her entire basis for her superiority, was not just wrong. It was ignorant. She hadn't just insulted a diplomat. She had insulted the very thing the man with the $50 million check admired. "Now, Mr. Miller," James said, finally turning to the crumbling man, "I was flying to Geneva tonight to attend the Global Health Summit. Tomorrow afternoon, I was scheduled to be the keynote speaker announcing the Harrison Foundation's new $50 million Urban Future grant recipient. Yes, sir. The keynote. We were so looking forward to it, Stephen babbled, a desperate, sycophantic grin plastered on his face. Were you? James said. Your organization, the Miller Initiative, was at the top of our list. Your proposal was adequate. But we at the Foundation look for more than adequate proposals. We look for partners. We look for people, for leaders, who embody our core values: integrity, humility, and a deep, profound respect for all cultures and peoples. He paused, letting the words hang in the pressurized air. And you, sir, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, and your wife have just given me the most enlightening demonstration of your true core values. And I must say, I am appalled. No, Stephen yelped, a strangled, desperate sound. No, sir, please. This is her. This is not me. This is not the initiative. I love all cultures. Please. You sat there, James Harrison said, his voice flat and final. You sat there while your wife bullied a black woman. You sat there while she mocked the United Nations. You sat there while she questioned a diplomat's credentials. You said nothing. Your silence, Mr. Miller, was your endorsement. You are, in every way, complicit. Caroline Miller finally found her voice. It was a high, thin wail. You can't do this. You don't know us. Stephen, tell him. Tell him he's wrong. Stephen Miller just stared at James Harrison, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. His career, his future, his entire identity was being dismantled in front of an audience of strangers, 30,000 feet in the air. The retribution was not loud. It was quiet, surgical, and absolutely devastating. James Harrison turned from the Millers and addressed the purser, Mark. Mark, he said, his voice returning to a normal, conversational volume that was somehow more terrifying. I will not be requiring you to file a complaint against Dr. Hayes. I will, however, be filing a formal complaint with the CEO of this airline, a personal friend, regarding the behavior of passenger Caroline Miller. Her racial profiling and dangerous accusation of terrorism against a UN diplomat is, I believe, grounds for a lifetime ban from this airline alliance. Mark, the purser, just nodded. Yes, Mr. Harrison, I will note it in my flight report. The captain has already been informed of the disturbance. No, Caroline gasped. A lifetime ban. Her status? And as for you, Mr. Miller, James said, turning back one last time, consider your application for the Urban Future grant to be officially and permanently denied, effective immediately. I will not be attending your panel. I will not be taking your calls, and I will be informing the grant board in the morning that the Miller Initiative is no longer aligned with the Foundation's mission. He didn't need to say more. In the world of non-profits, that phrase was a death sentence. It wasn't just a no, it was a blacklisting. Stephen Miller wouldn't just lose this grant, he would likely never get any major grant again. The word would spread. He was unaligned. Please, Stephen whispered. It was a pathetic sound. He finally slumped back into his seat, 4F, a completely broken man. He put his head in his hands and, to the horror of everyone, began to sob. Not loudly, but in small, hitching, desperate gasps. Caroline Miller was now a statue of pure, unadulterated rage. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fury. She looked at her husband, weeping, and her expression was not one of sympathy. It was one of pure, unbridled contempt. He was weak. He had failed her. Then she looked at Ella. Ella, who had been standing this whole time, was the calm center of the storm. She looked sad. She had seen this kind of self-destruction before, in war zones and boardrooms. It was always the same, arrogance, followed by a fall. "You!" Caroline hissed at Ella, her voice low and venomous. You bitch! You did this! You set me up!" Before Ella could even react, James Harrison's voice barked out, "That's enough! Mark, this passenger is still creating a disturbance. Move her!" "Move me where?" Caroline shrieked. "To first class? I demand—" "No, Mum," Mark said, his patience gone. He motioned to Sarah and another flight attendant. "We will be escorting you to the rear galley. You can sit on a jump seat for the remainder of the flight. You are a security risk." "You can't! I paid for this seat!" "You have forfeited your right to this seat with your behavior, Mrs. Miller," Mark said. "Now please, come with us, or we will have the captain divert this flight and have you removed in handcuffs. Your choice." The word handcuffs finally did it. Caroline Miller, her face a grotesque mask of tears and makeup, stood up. She shot one last, poisonous look at Ella, and then at her sobbing husband. She said nothing. She just turned and let the flight attendants lead her down the dark aisle to the back of the plane, a queen being frog-marched to her execution. The cabin was silent. Stephen Miller didn't look up. James Harrison turned to Ella. "Dr. Hayes," he said, his voice warm again. "I am profoundly sorry you had to endure that. Please, sit." Ella sank back into her seat, her knees weak. "Mr. Harrison," she said. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yes," James said. "I did. The Harrison Foundation's money is useless if we allow the very people we're trying to fight, the bullies, the bigots, the arrogant, to run roughshod over the people doing the real work. Like you." He smiled. "Now please, get some rest. Geneva is waiting." Ella simply nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She picked up her pen, looked at her report, and then put it down. She leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she let herself feel, just for a moment, completely and totally safe. The final 2 hours of the flight passed in a heavy, pressurized silence that had nothing to do with the altitude. The normal cabin hum of movies, quiet chatter and clinking glasses was gone, replaced by a thick, awkward stillness. The business-class cabin had transformed from a space of luxury into a shared holding cell, every passenger a reluctant witness. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with a forced, tight-lipped professionalism. They were no longer just servers. They were wardens. They periodically checked the rear galley, where Caroline Miller was being detained, and cast brief, pitying glances at the man in 4F. Stephen Miller had not moved. His untouched meal, a meticulously plated fillet of beef, had been placed before him, and then, an hour later, silently removed. Still pristine. He was a man carved from ice. He hadn't flinched, hadn't spoken, hadn't even looked at the flight attendant who cleared the tray. His laptop screen had long since gone black, and in its dark, reflective surface, his own hollow-eyed expression stared back at him. He was a shell, a man who had watched his entire future, the $50 million grant, the career, the reputation, the marriage, disintegrate in a matter of minutes, and he had done nothing but sweat and stammer. Across the aisle, Dr. Ella Hayes had tried to return to her report. She uncapped her pen, read the same sentence 3 times, and found the words wouldn't stick. The adrenaline from the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a familiar, bone-deep ache. It was the same exhaustion she felt after a 72-hour ceasefire negotiation, yet this felt smaller, dirtier. She looked at her cobalt-blue bag, her shield resting by her feet. She had carried it into compounds where men with guns decided who ate and who starved. She had used the reports inside it to reroute food convoys and build freshwater wells. Her entire life was a battle of high-stakes reality. And tonight, She had been forced to fight a different, uglier battle, one of pure, baseless prejudice, waged over the perceived status of a handbag. It was absurd. It was pathetic. And she had to admit, it was profoundly demeaning. She found herself feeling a strange, hollow pity. Not for Caroline, whose malice was a living, breathing thing, but for Stephen, for his weakness, for his complicity, and for a world that produced people so insulated by wealth that they could mistake a diplomat for a grifter and a humanitarian symbol for a fake. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning our final descent into Geneva International Airport. The captain's voice, smooth and mundane, shattered the quiet. The plane chimed. The fasten seatbelt sign illuminated. The sound made Stephen Miller jump, the first involuntary movement he'd made in hours. He fumbled for his seatbelt, his hands trembling violently. Ella looked out her window. The Alps, invisible in the dark, were a powerful presence, and below, the lights of Geneva sparkled like a spread of cold diamonds reflecting off the black mirror of the lake. Her destination, the world of clean, carpeted conference rooms and formalized stale arguments. It was a different kind of battlefield, but one she knew well. Tonight's ugly skirmish, she realized, was just another reminder of what she was fighting against. The plane banked, the hydraulics whining as the flaps extended. The cabin tilted, and for a moment, Ella could see Stephen Miller clearly across the aisle. He had his head braced in his hands, his eyes shut, his body rigid against the force of the descent. He was a man bracing for an impact that had already happened. Thump, squeal, rumble. The wheels touched the tarmac, a perfectly smooth landing. The reverse thrusters roared, pushing them all back into their seats, and then a gentle, coasting taxi toward the terminal. It was over. Ella methodically packed her report and her pen back into the blue satchel. She zipped it shut, the sound of the metal teeth meeting cutting through the quiet cabin. She felt the eyes of the other passengers on her, on the bag. It was no longer an invisible object. It was a statement. The plane stopped. The engines wound down. The final thunk of the jet bridge connecting to the fuselage was a sound of finality. Before the ding of the seatbelt sign, the purser's voice came over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Geneva. We have now arrived at the gate. Due to the incident that occurred during this flight, we will be handling deplaning in a specific, controlled order. We ask that all passengers please remain in your seats. I repeat, all passengers must remain seated until a member of the crew has instructed you to deplane. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The cabin was utterly still. We will be allowing Mr. Harrison and Dr. Hayes to deplane first. We apologize for the delay and thank you for your complete cooperation. It was a public coronation and a public shaming, all in one. The seatbelt sign turned off. In the entire cabin, only 2 people moved. James Harrison stood, brushing an imaginary piece of lint from his perfect blazer. He looked as rested as if he'd just awoken from a full night's sleep. He glanced at Ella and nodded. Dr. Hayes, after you. Ella stood. She shouldered her satchel. She stepped into the aisle, and she had to walk past seat 4F. She paused, just for a second. Stephen Miller was still in his seat. He was not looking at her. He was staring at the blank screen of the seatback in front of him, his face grey and slack-jawed. He hadn't unbuckled his seatbelt. He was a man who had not only lost his future, he had lost his present. He didn't even have the energy to feel the shame that was radiating from him in palpable waves. He was simply hollow. Ella felt no triumph, just that deep, profound wave of sadness for his emptiness, for the moral vacuum his silence had exposed. She walked on. She and James walked together up the aisle. a quiet procession of two. The other passengers watched them, their eyes a mixture of awe, pity, and a morbid curiosity to see the end of the drama. At the aircraft door, Mark the purser and Sarah the flight attendant were standing. "Mr. Harrison, Dr. Hayes," Mark said, his face a mask of professional respect. "Thank you for your patience." They stepped out into the brightly lit jet bridge. At the end, where the bridge met the terminal, two Swiss police officers and a stern-looking man in a dark suit were waiting. The man in the suit stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, Dr. Hayes, my name is Jean-Pierre Dubois, Geneva Station's manager. We have been fully briefed by the captain and by our corporate office. We apologize for the disturbance. We are here to escort Mrs. Miller." As if summoned by his words, a commotion erupted from the plane door behind them. "Let go of me! You cannot touch me! This is Switzerland! I know my rights! This is an outrage!" Caroline Miller appeared, her blonde hair a frantic mess, her white tracksuit rumpled. She was being held firmly by the arm by another flight attendant. When she saw the police, she froze for a split second. Then her eyes landed on Ella and James, standing free. Her face, already pale, contorted into a mask of pure venom. "You!" she shrieked, lunging at Ella. "You did this! You! Lying! Scheming! Imposter! You ruined everything! You ruined me!" The Swiss officers moved instantly, blocking her path. "Madame, s'il vous plaît," one said, his voice calm and firm. "Stephen!" Caroline shrieked, twisting to look back at the plane, which was now full of passengers' faces staring from the doorway. "Stephen, don't you just sit there, you useless, spineless coward! Do something!" The doorway remained full of strangers. Stephen Miller did not appear. "Stephen!" Her voice broke, the shriek turning into a pathetic, cracking wail. The fight was gone. The venom was gone. There was just the raw, ugly sound of realization. He wasn't coming. He had left her to face this alone. "Madame, you will come with us," the officer said, taking her arm. She didn't resist this time. She just whimpered, all the bluster and arrogance draining out of her, leaving a small, wrinkled, and defeated woman in an expensive tracksuit. As they led her away, James Harrison turned to Ella. "Doctor, are you being met?" "Yes," Ella said, her voice steady. "A car from the mission is waiting." "Good." He extended a hand. "It was an honor to meet you, Ella. Truly. Your work is the true north. Don't ever let people like that, or their quiet, complicit husbands, make you doubt it for a second." Ella shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. "Thank you, James. For your voice, and for the record, your briefcase is very handsome." He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound. "The artisans in Lisbon will be pleased to hear it. Have a productive summit." He turned and walked, with unhurried purpose, toward the diplomatic channel. Ella watched him go, a man of quiet, immense power. She turned the other way, toward the main terminal. She heard one last, faint cry of, "This is not fair," before the doors to the police office slid shut. Ella walked out into the vast, quiet expanse of the Geneva terminal. She adjusted the strap of her cobalt blue bag on her shoulder. Her shield. It felt no heavier and no lighter than it had this morning. It was exactly what it had always been. A symbol of service, not status. A tool for her work. She touched the small silver compass on the clasp, a silent thank you to its giver. She walked out of the terminal doors and into the cool, clean Swiss night air, leaving the recycled air and the recycled bigotry of the plane behind, ready for the real work to begin. Karma isn't always instant, but on Flight 108, it was served before the plane even landed. Caroline Miller's arrogance and prejudice cost her husband his $50 million dream and cost her own reputation. She learned the hard way that you can't judge a person's worth by their logos or the color of their skin. That simple blue bag held more power, integrity, and importance than Carolyn's entire collection of designer goods. It was a symbol of service, not status. Dr. Ella Hayes continued her mission, unchanged, while the Millers faced a future they had destroyed with their own bigotry. What did you think of Carolyn's instant karma? Have you ever witnessed someone make a terrible assumption and have it blow up in their face? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories are what make this community thrive. If you enjoyed this story, please show your support by hitting that like button, share it with a friend who needs to see this, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama and powerful stories just like this one. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss an update.